In today's video we are going to have a look at the best F this job I quit stories. And
you're watching 69 North Entertainment.
You might have had a moment in your career when you thought to yourself, F this. I quit this job, only to go back there again the next day. Not the people in today's video though. They quit and said F this job. Here are the best moments when people have realized they needed a new job. Had a negative performance review after working for a company for a month with little to no training. Walked in the next morning to one of the managers saying I basically was a warm body to cover for this one girl who was pregnant and I likely wouldn't be there after her maternity leave was done. Looked him in the eye, nodded, grabbed my things, and left. Was on a busy delivery day where contractors were lined up around the block to collect their materials for their construction jobs. Didn't look back, didn't regret the decision. I worked at a pretty major electronics company as an engineer. I put in for 2 weeks of vacation for the birth of my child. My boss didn't approve of my vacation, saying I only give 1 week vacation for anyone ever. I lost my cool a bit, but had no choice because I had to have insurance and I was set to receive a bonus in 2 months. At that moment, I knew I was done with that place. Fast forward 2 months and 3 manufacturing engineers had already quit. Nobody received their bonus on the date which it was supposed to be issued. People were pissed. It became a huge deal, and everyone was aware that they were avoiding the mass exodus that was going to occur as soon as the bonus hit. 1.5 months later, the check clears. I was one of 7 engineers that quit the day the bonus hit the bank. We all went to lunch. I was in high school and worked at a ghetto indoor amusement park thing, and we were forced to clock out before we did our closing duties. And then when we were finished, we had to wait for the owner to critique our closing duties and tell us if we needed to redo something. We were not allowed to leave. It was past midnight at this point, and after going over my closing duties the owner told me to scrub the floors on my hands and knees with a brush. I said F you and left. A few weeks later both owners were arrested for embezzlement and the place was resold, I guess. This was 16 years ago. I was pretty early in my career. I work in IT, and at the time I worked for an MSP, which for the unaware, is an IT consulting company for other small businesses. This involved significant travel in my own car at my own expense, routinely traveling 80+ miles per day. I'd have to fill up my car twice a week normally. My boss had a history of not paying for 2 months at a time and would always come up with a lame excuse why. After a year of working for him, I got so bad off for money that I couldn't afford to pay my rent, electric bill, cell phone, or even gas for my car. This had nothing to do with my overspending. I was owed about $6,000 back pay at this point. I had enough gas in my car to drive about 20 miles, and my workplace was about 15 miles away. I called my boss and told him I must be paid today because I do not have enough money for gas to visit any of our clients. He said he'd give me gas money for the day. I told him this isn't acceptable. What about my electric bill, rent, cell phone bill which I'm required to have to do my job? He said he couldn't pay me that. So I told him fine, I quit effective immediately, and good luck figuring out how to support the 3/4 of the total client base that I exclusively supported for you. He then told me that I could come in and pick up my final check immediately. So I drove my car on a one-way trip to the office, actually picked up my final check, cashed it, and was able to buy gas so I could actually make it back home. This guy charged clients $150 per hour for my work and paid me $12 per hour. He absolutely could afford to pay me, he just didn't want to. I even did work for one of his personal friends who was a client of his because this asshole charged his friend $75 per hour for me to do the work. I only charged $25 per hour and we were both happier for it. Even his friend knew he sucked. I had a new job lined up before the end of that same day and it paid $3 per hour more too. I later saw he had an arrest for cocaine possession and picking up a hooker in Miami shortly afterward. Good old Florida making arrest records public. This guy had a 4,000 square feet house with a water overlook, a wife, and 2 young children. I worked in a bakery for a while. They scheduled me for 3 a.m. to 7 p.m. for 14 days in a row. On my 9th day and I fell asleep at the counter and got yelled at. Walked out, but I was so tired I couldn't walk home. My roommate picked me up, I fell asleep in the car on the way home, and stayed asleep for 9 hours. Roommate checked on me, brought me a pillow and blanket. When I woke up and came inside after the 9 hours, I realized I had lost 3 days in a sleep-deprived stupor. While I was asleep in the car, my boss and store owner had decided that trying to break into my apartment and harass my roommate was the right thing to do. Before we continue, now would be a good time to like this video and subscribe. You can also hit that bell so you'll get notified when we publish new videos. I worked weekends on a dementia unit at an assisted living in grad school. My job was doing activities on the floor. There were 2 people who did bathrooms, changing, lunch, etc. They were always on their phones. I'd get asked by visitors to take residents to the bathroom, which I was not trained for. One day one of the residents fell and it was chaos. I was so tired of being the only one actually doing anything that I finished my shift and left a voicemail quitting. When I said goodbye to the residents that evening, one looked at me and said, "You aren't coming back, are you?" Gut-wrenching. It was the most exhausting work I had ever done because there was no off moment. I was working in a cafe by the beach over the summer. Since the cafe was on a pier, it was only open on the weekend. They had a real issue with the shelf life of products such as fresh milk, cream, etc. So they would freeze everything on Sunday, then deep freeze the next week. They never kept track of what had been frozen, so they kept breaking the cold chain all the time. I didn't like that and kept track all the time to not poison anyone, but I knew the manager didn't care. One day, a customer ordered a slice of carrot cake, and when I went to look for it, I found it all moldy, so, of course, I chucked it in the bin. The manager ordered me to get it back and scrape the mold and serve it anyway. I was out the door 5 minutes later. I worked at a large construction firm as a project manager, and at one point I made some decisions that influenced our profits by a couple of percents. My then manager decided he thought it would be fun if he claimed he made those decisions and started telling higher managers what he had done. When I heard, I confronted him, but he tried to evade the conversation. Later on, somebody quit his job, so there was only me as a project manager in this certain branch. He asked if I could take over some extra projects and stuff. I didn't refuse, but had to think about it. He then told our managers that I would be taking all projects. I emailed him and all managers that I quit and gave a short explanation as to why. I'd been super stressed in my old PR job, and it ended in burnout. My boss was a nice guy, but way too relaxed for the job, so in the end most of the work landed on my desk. Eventually, I had a breakdown, started therapy, and after a few months, I returned to work. We talked a lot, wanted to change things. Even my coworkers came forward and said they had problems with the workload as well. I thought my boss finally got it. A few days later, he randomly asked when I will be my old self again and said he didn't understand why I and my coworkers had been so stressed in the first place. The next day I handed him my letter of resignation. It was the best feeling and decision ever. Worked at a postal outlet in a drug store, common in Canada. The job was part-time and in the next town, about an hour away by bus. The manager played all sorts of games with the schedule in order to get every weekend off and to make long weekends she could escape to her trailer. She kept scheduling me for 3 p.m. to close every day, even though I was in college. One of our big holiday weekends approaches, and the manager changes the schedule without any notice nor telling me, messing up everyone's hours so she can have a long weekend at the trailer. I was to have that Friday off and was scheduled all weekend. She started calling my house at 9 a.m. on Friday and called 11 more times that day, leaving messages like "wakey wakey sleepyhead" and "wake up, I need you to come and wake up, I really need you to call me back." Each one getting more and more frantic as the hours ticked away. That was it, I was done with her bull for 20 hours at minimum wage. My friend drove me into the store. I walked to the back and the manager saw me. She got all bitchy and started on the "where were you? I needed you hours ago." I dropped the plastic bag with my uniform on the counter, stuck her the finger, and turned around. The look of panic on her face was incredible. "No, wait, let's talk about this," was all I heard her howling as I walked out. There was no one else to work that weekend. She had to do it all by herself. I worked at a dry cleaner that had the shittiest auto bagging machine ever. Every day the thing jammed up and was offline for at least 2 hours, and everyone had to manually bag clothes while maintenance was called in to fix it. At some point, I tinkered with the machine and figured out that if the sensor was moved like half an inch up, it more accurately sensed when clothes had made it into the machine and didn't jam. The thing didn't jam for about a month. My boss was over the moon when I told her what I'd discovered. However, a month later it did end up jamming in the same way it always had, except this time I was called into my boss's office, where the general manager was waiting to yell at me, write me up, and put me on probation. Mind you, the thing was offline for the same reason it had been every day, and for as long since before I made the adjustment to the sensor, so this punishment was just objectively asinine. I put in my 2 weeks the next day and learned a valuable lesson about putting yourself out there for the benefit of the company. The job I was working at gave 2 paid days off per year and 5 sick days. We were not allowed to take unpaid days off. They had previously found that another employee took 30 unpaid days off and said no one else was allowed to do that anymore. I was 2 years into this job when I won a free vacation to another country. I only needed 4 days off work since the one day was a stat holiday, but they declined it. I tried everything.
Thank you for watching 69 North Entertainment. Have a good rest of the day or night. And remember to like and subscribe.